This week's topic is Presenter, brought to you by Group 5. Transformational learning. Merriam-Cafarella and Baumgartner define transformational learning as learning that results in a dramatic change in the way we see ourselves and the world. During this topic, we will discuss some approaches to and emerging perspectives of transformational learning, the key concepts of it, and a few critiques of transformational learning theory. Jack Mezirow introduced his approach to transformational learning in 1978, and it focuses primarily on how adults make sense of things that happen in their lives. Have you ever considered why two people may interpret the same experience in very different ways? According to Mezirow, our frame of reference is the filter through which we see our experiences. Frames of reference are broken into two dimensions: habits of mind and points of view. A habit of mind is a general way of thinking about the world and may be something you've been brought up to believe or may have always thought. For example, some Americans may feel superior to citizens of other countries simply because they are American. This habit of mind is likely established early in childhood by both parents and in school, where America is painted as the greatest country in the world. Points of view are opinions about specific things or situations. Adults often discuss their points of view with each other, and a person's point of view can change as a result of these discussions. Mezirow's theory of transformational learning is made up of 10 steps, as shown here. The process starts with the experience that is out of the ordinary for the individual. An example might be an unplanned pregnancy or the coronavirus. This unsettling experience can lead to the individual to examine themselves, and they may feel ashamed of what's happened or fearful of the future. At some point, the individual is able to process their assumptions about the situation and realize they have not been singled out. This realization leads to the exploration of new roles, planning how to deal with their new reality, researching, testing the waters, gaining confidence, and finally, reintegrating themselves back into their lives in their new role. Adult development is cognitive and depends on the examination of assumptions, reflection, and national discourse comprised from andragogy and experiential learning. Transformational learning in Mezirow's framework results in more inclusive, discriminating, permeable, and interrogative perspective. One that better accommodates the meaning one makes of one's experience, as restoring one's life is quite similar to specifically this question as to how can I compose a story big enough with a horizon broad enough to account for as much possible of my actual life and render it available to me as a coherent, remembered whole, or a thought. Delos' psychodevelopmental perspective. This theory augments Mezirow's approach, but emphasizes storytelling as a way to promote development. Delos divides adult development into 3 maps that guide the journey into a transformed world. The first map is made up of phase theories, which confront age-related problems and are dependent on the social-cultural backgrounds of individuals. The second map focuses on cognitive growth, which influences the ability to think outside your own social-cultural norms. Lastly, the third map encompasses the intellectual and ethical journey towards more complex thought processes. Boyd's psychoanalytic approach examines the personal inner journey towards a significant personality change. By better understanding the unconscious mind and the influence it has on our daily life, individuals can come to terms with their inner conflict and achieve self-actualization. Many of us are familiar with the term self-actualization based on learning about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we learn that self-actualization is loosely defined as reaching one's full potential. The last approach we are going to look at is Freier's social-cultural approach to transformational learning. This approach is directly tied to personal empowerment and social transformation. Freier divides education into 2 camps: banking education and problem-possessing education. Banking education is teacher-centric and is entirely based on what the teacher wants the student to learn. Dialogue, which has been identified in other approaches as crucial to transformation, is non-existent. On the other hand, problem-posing education is a system in which the teachers and students work together to learn and investigate social-cultural norms. This type of education depends on dialogue to stimulate learning and encourages learners to gain awareness of oppression and take part in social change. 3 additional approaches have been identified as emerging perspectives and transformational learning. They are the spiritual, cultural, race-centric, and planetary approaches. The spiritual cultural approach emphasizes the importance of community and openness to new experiences. As evidenced by its name, The race-centric approach is centered on the cultural norms of a specific race. It began with the focus of African Americans, but can be applied to any minority culture. It encourages different cultures to engage in dialogue and negotiation. Lastly, the planetary approach positions us well where all are interconnected and connected to the physical world around us. 3 key concepts have been identified as critical to transformative learning. Experience is included, in varying degrees, in each of the approaches we've discussed. Although not every daily experience results in adult learning, experiences for which we are unprepared can and often do. Several examples of these major experiences are negative, but they can also be positive experiences such as getting a promotion at work or becoming a parent for the first time. Anytime an adult experiences something previously unencountered, there is an opportunity for transformational learning. Key to the opportunity for transformation is critical reflection. Simply having experience is not enough to trigger transformative learning. Individuals must consider the event itself, how they responded, and how the experience impacts their beliefs or assumptions. Both during and as a result of this reflection, there is individual development. This development helps adults accept continued learning opportunities, become aware that they are in charge of their learning. As with any theory, there are critiques of transformational learning. The primary critique of Mezirow approach is its lack of context. Many feel his approach fails to make the individual biography into consideration and places too strong a focus on the average middle-class white male. It also seems to ignore the issue of power as it relates to context and how this can impact individual transformation. Mezirow's theory is also arguably too dependent on the rational thinker. Not everyone is able to separate their experiences from their emotions, but Mezirow's approach requires individuals to think outside their emotions in order to reflect on experience. In addition to feelings, relationships are not considered. Anyone with strong familial, romantic, or friendly relationships know that they are strong influence on experiences and the ability to get through them. Therefore, considering the impact of relationships on individuals is key to transformative learning. Lastly, both Mezirow and Freire make social change seem relatively simple in their approaches. Individuals should recognize oppression and actively engage in social action against their oppressors. A quick examination of historical social movements shows it is not necessary to lessen the burden of oppression. Prior to engaging in social action, learning can also enable individuals with how to deal with oppression while they ready themselves for future change. We have established that experiences can trigger learning. Next, we will discuss 4 models of experiential learning. Merriam, Caffarella, and Baumgartner discuss 4 models of experiential learning. The first is Kolb's, which stresses the importance of being open to new experiences and, through consideration and analysis, the development of putting new ideas into practice. However, similar to Mezirow's approach to transformative learning, Kolb's model is also criticized for failing to account for context or power. Jarvis's model builds on Kolb's, and that does account for individual background. He presents experiential learning as divided into 2 types, non-reflective and reflective learning. Only in the reflective type are we actually engaging in a higher form of learning. Bowden and Walker developed this model even further by examining how individual differences affect experiential learning. They argue individuals must rid themselves of negative feelings about an individual experience before learning effectively takes place. Finally, Usher, Bryant, and Johnson approached experiential learning in a different way. They created a map of experiential learning divided into 4 quadrants. According to them, learning happens in and around these quadrants, but each one represents a different learning value. In their model, experience is learning. So far, we have discussed reflection as part of both transformational and experiential learning. Reflective practice allows individuals to make sound decisions, even during difficult situations. We will explore 2 processes of reflective practice. Reflection on action is simply thinking about something that already happened and figuring out how to do it better next time. For example, you fell off a ladder. When you think back, you realize you were reaching too far for something and caused the ladder to tip. It tipped because the weight distribution was off. You decide next time you'll get down and move the ladder instead of reaching. Reflection in action is a more of a spur-of-the-moment thing. This process occurs when a change needs to be made mid-event. An example would be a mother-to-be who plans to give birth naturally and has a firm labor plan. However, Once she gets to the hospital and the reality of the situation sets in, she decides to scrap that plan and get epidural. Regardless of the process used, the act of reflecting is necessary to learning from our experiences in order to better ourselves and the world around us. Narrative learning, simply put, is a relatable way that lesson learning is passed down that offers a human perspective and captures lessons in a recognizable and relatable fashion. This is seen easily in childhood as stories are read. Think Grimm fairy tales. This is done with the purpose of teaching a child a lesson, like Hansel and Gretel, and that lesson being that of greed. In adult education, this evolves into biographies, as we learn life lessons from each other's stories. Tisdale defines spirituality with regard to education with 7 assumptions about the nature of spirituality. And the 7 assumptions are comprised of the following. Spirituality and religion are not the same. Spirituality is about an awareness and honoring of wholeness and the interconnectedness of all things. Spirituality is fundamentally about meaning making, which leads to number 4. Spirituality is always present in the learning environment. Spiritual development constitutes moving toward greater authenticity or to be a more authentic self. Spirituality is about how people construct knowledge through a largely unconscious and symbolic process, often made of concrete and art forms such as music, art, image, symbol, and ritual, which are manifested culturally. And lastly, spiritual experiences most often happen by surprise. From Learning in Adulthood, a comprehensive guide, a somatic approach to education implies education that trusts individuals to learn from and listen to the information they are receiving from the interaction of themselves with the environment. Somatic, or embodied knowing, is experiential knowledge that involves senses, perceptions, and mind, body, action, and reaction. This is evident with such things such as fight or flight, or when somebody sees something so drastic that they have a physical reaction like throwing up from it. Issues arising from the somatic approach to adult education include some of the following. Recognition of the body as a source of knowledge. Empowerment, resistance to dominant culture. And a means of developing empathy and respecting diversity. 2 paths for adult education have been identified. The first is the embodied way, in which a more holistic approach to curriculum development, teaching, learning, and research brings the body back into the educational theory and practice. The second is the body project, which actually recognizes the body's place in the classroom and the ways in which classrooms, teachers, learners, and institutions construct the body as gendered, raced, diseased, disabled, or sexually oriented. This concludes Group 5's Week 4 presentation on Presenter. Thank you for your attention. We hope you learned some valuable constructs and concepts in this week's reading.